Hey everyone, welcome back into our latest Traded Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and tonight I'm going to dive into one of the biggest stories we've seen in the last couple of weeks within the cannabis industry. Florida Congressman Brian Mast, yes, the Republican combat veteran who's been gaining serious influence on Capitol Hill, has officially signed on as the co-sponsor of the state's 2.0 Act, and that is huge. Why? Because Mast isn't just another name on a bill. He's a respected voice within the Republican Party, and when someone like him throws support behind federal cannabis reform, it signals momentum that cannot be ignored. So with that, let's find out why he did it. First, Mast's decision is making headlines because it shows just how much the conversation around cannabis has shifted inside the GOP. This is a guy who has built his political brand on national security and veterans issues. So when he says states should have the right to set their own cannabis policies, it carries weight, especially with lawmakers who still view legalization skeptically. And Mast isn't alone here. Representatives Dave Joyce and Max Miller, both Republicans from Ohio, and Democrat Dina Titus from Nevada, reintroduced this legislation earlier this year. Florida's Greg Steube signed on a little later, but Mast's name is the one turning heads, especially among conservatives who might otherwise stay quiet on cannabis. So really, what is Mast supporting here? Let's break it down, because this isn't just another symbolic cannabis bill. The state's 2.0 Act could change how cannabis is regulated across the country. Here's the big picture. It's designed to finally give states and even tribal governments full control over how they handle cannabis without worrying about federal interference. Congress laid out 8 main reasons for why this bill matters, and they're worth going through because they set the stage for everything else. 1, different states, different visions. Some want total prohibition, others want to treat cannabis like alcohol. This bill respects that. 2, the illicit market is still massive. About 75% of all cannabis sales are still happening illegally. 3, high taxes are fueling that black market. Legal cannabis is often 2 or 3 times more expensive than illegal weed because of excessive taxes. 4, there's federal tax rules. They punish legal operators. Section 280E forces cannabis businesses to pay taxes like criminal enterprises. Then there's number 5, the feds need to handle interstate commerce. Right now, states can't regulate cross-border cannabis trade, which is why the black market again thrives. 6, there's law enforcement resources and are being wasted. Legalization frees up police to focus on violent crime and serious drug trafficking. 7, a fair federal tax structure is needed. The plan calls for a modest excise tax to fund oversight but not cripple businesses. And finally, number 8, tribal self-government must be respected. Tribes would set their own rules without federal interference, and that is important. Okay, so now that's the why. Now let's talk about the how. And this is where the state's 2.0 Act really gets interesting. First, the bill changes how federal law applies to cannabis. If you're following state law, you're essentially shielding from federal prosecution. Also, if you're operating under tribal law in a state that permits cannabis, you're also protected. So that's a huge shift. It formally tells the federal government to back off if you're legal where you operate. Second, it opens the door for interstate cannabis commerce, but only between states that allow it. And here's the catch. States can't ban shipments from simply passing through if they're legal at both the start and end points, but they can set reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions to protect public health. It's a delicate balance. Some legal experts are already predicting lawsuits over what counts as reasonable restrictions. But for the first time, legal interstate trade would be possible, and that is a good thing. And then third, the bill effectively removes state legal cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. The Attorney General would have 180 days to finalize a rule making that official. But here's an important detail. This only applies to cannabis businesses operating legally under state or tribal law. Illegal operators are still under federal drug laws, and that is important to understand. Next up is consumer safety. The FDA would finally have clear authority to regulate cannabis products. If it's a drug, it's treated like any other drug. If it's a food for dietary supplement, it's regulated like food products containing alcohol. Or other cannabis products like gummies or vape pens. They must meet testing and manufacturing standards, plus strict marketing rules to keep products away from kids, which is understandable. The FDA would then have 180 days to issue those rules, and this is key, no pre-market approval will be required. That's great news for small operators who feared being buried in red tape, and we've all seen that in many industries before. So now let's talk taxes, because this is where the state's 2.0 Act could transform the industry. With it, it eliminates Section 280E, meaning cannabis businesses can finally deduct normal operating expenses like any other legal business. Hallelujah. And that modest federal excise tax mentioned earlier, it's designed to be low enough so we don't get a pile-on effect where federal and state taxes make legal cannabis more expensive than black market weed. Common sense needs to prevail here. If this works as intended, it could shrink the illicit market almost overnight. And wouldn't that be a game changer? Also, something to look at too is public safety, and it isn't being ignored here either. The bill orders a detailed federal study on traffic safety in states with legal cannabis, looking at crashes, fatalities, and how states test for impairment. That report is due within a year. And finally, this act makes it crystal clear: operating in compliance with state or tribal law will not be treated as drug trafficking. Also, no property forfeiture, and legal cannabis proceeds won't be treated as the proceeds of a crime. So for investors and banks, that's a big deal. It could unlock new financing opportunities almost immediately. And it would. Something we've talked about for years here. So really, where does this go from here? The States 2.0 Act has rare bipartisan support, and Brian Mast's involvement gives it credibility with Republicans who have been reluctant to support cannabis reform. But don't expect smooth sailing. Federal prohibitionists are still fighting hard, and some public health groups are worried about commercialization moving too quickly. And you know this is coming if this bill ever does pass. But that's why Brian Mast's support matters so much. He's a veteran, a conservative, and someone who has credibility with lawmakers who might otherwise say no to anything cannabis related. His backing gives this bill a real shot at gaining traction, something we couldn't have said just a few years ago. So the States 2.0 Act doesn't fully legalize cannabis nationwide, but it does something just as important. It lets states and tribes decide for themselves. And for an industry stuck in legal limbo for decades, let's face it, that's progress. So what do you all think? Will Mast support push this bill across the finish line, or is federal reform still too much of an uphill battle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit that like button if you found this breakdown useful. And make sure to subscribe for more deep dives in cannabis policy, markets, and reform. I'm Shad Dales, this is Trade to Black, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone.